Welcome to episode 10 and the last episode of our series on Torah and vegetarianism. I know you're sad. I'm personally sad. I think it's I've really enjoyed every single episode here, and the facts and the sources in the Torah that have come out are absolutely astounding. I have to thank you, Michael. But in this last episode, I know you'd like to share with us something very special from Rav Kook. But before I hand you over to Michael, I just want to say, because Michael is a very big fan of Rav Kook, and Rav Kook actually said one of my favorite quotes of all time. And don't ask me why it's my favorite quote, but it just, every time I think of this quote, it just sends a shiver down my spine, because it's absolutely true. Rav Kook is quoted as saying, "I do not speak because I have the power to speak. I speak because I do not have the power to stay silent." And I think that's really why Rav Kook stood up to the plate, and he talked about issues that other Gedolim didn't speak about. And you might think he was, Rav Kook must have been on the edge, on the periphery. No, he was connected to so many of the Gedolim. He's so respected in every way. We have Mosdot the Rav Kook, and so many modern day testimonies to his tzidkut. And I really feel that what we're going to say now is a testimony to the fact that Rav Kook just could not stay silent. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Michael, and he's going to,
Thank you, Rav Mashiach. I'd like to present selections from a book that was written by Rav Kook's disciple, Rav David Cohen, the Nazir of Yerushalayim. It was based on Rav Kook's notes. It was the writings of Rav Kook, but I believe this was written after his death. I'd like to give an abridged version of selected chapters, but after reading this, I was really quite blown away by the beautiful language and the concepts presented, and I tried to summarize it and perhaps put my own slant on it or put into my own words, but there is no better justice given to this than to actually quote word for word an abridged version of this book, A Vision of Vegetarianism and Peace. So I'd like to take a few chapters and just listen to Rav Kook's beautiful words. From chapter 1, The Just Treatment of Animals. There is a fundamental part of a lofty, humane and progressive sensibility that, according to the present state of the prevailing culture, exists today only in the pleasant dream of a few extremely idealistic souls, an innate ethical striving, a feeling for what is humane and just, to consider the rights of animals with all that this entails. Certain cruel philosophies, especially those that denied belief in God, according to their views on human ethics based upon reason, have advocated that man completely stifle within himself any sense of justice for animals. However, they have not succeeded, nor shall they succeed, with all their self-serving cleverness, in perverting the innate sense of justice that the Creator planted within the human soul. Although sympathy for animals is like the glow of a smouldering ember buried under a great heap of ashes, nevertheless, it is impossible for them to negate the sensitivity within every feeling heart. For, as a rule, the lack of morality among all humanity consists in failing to heed the good and noble instinct not to take any form of life, whether for one's needs or physical gratification. Our sages did not agree with these philosophical views. They tell us that the holy Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was visited with afflictions because he told a calf being led to slaughter that had sought refuge in the skirts of his garments, "Go, this is the purpose for which you were created." His healing, too, was brought about by a deed when he showed mercy to some weasels. This is mentioned in Baba Metzia, Daf 85 Amud Aleph. They did not conduct themselves like the philosophers who exchanged darkness for light for the sake of pragmatism. It is impossible to imagine that the master of all that transpires, who has mercy upon all his creatures, would establish an internal decree such as this in the creation that he pronounced exceedingly good. That it should be impossible for the human race to exist without violating its own moral instincts by shedding blood, be it even the blood of animals. Man's original diet was vegetarian. This is from chapter 2. There can be no doubt in the mind of any intelligent thinking person that when the Torah instructs humankind to dominate and have dominion over the flesh of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves upon the earth, this was quoted from Bereshit chapter 1 verse 28, it does not mean that the domination of a harsh ruler who afflicts his people and servants merely to fulfill his personal whim and desire according to the crookedness of his heart. It is unthinkable that the Torah would impose such a degree of servitude, sealed for all eternity, upon the world of God, who is good to all, and his mercy is upon all his works. This is from Tehillim 145 verse 9. And also from Tehillim chapter 89 verse 3, and who declared, the world shall be built upon kindness. Moreover, the Torah attests that all humanity once possessed this lofty moral level. Citing scriptural proofs, our sages explain, as in Sanhedrin, Daf 57 Amud Aleph, that Adam was not permitted to eat meat. In Bereshit chapter 1 verse 29, it's quoted, "Behold, I have given you every tree yielding seed for food." Eating meat was permitted to the children of Noah only after the flood. Like the green herb, I have given you everything. From Bereshit chapter 9 verse 3. Is it conceivable that this moral excellence, which once existed as an inherent human characteristic, should be lost forever? Concerning these and similar matters, it states, in Job 36 verse 3, I shall bring knowledge from afar, and unto my Maker I shall ascribe righteousness. In the future, God shall cause us to make great spiritual strides, and thus extricate us from this complex question. In chapter 12, this is Vegetarianism and Enlightenment. When humanity reaches its goal of complete happiness and spiritual liberation, when it attains that lofty peak of perfection that is pure knowledge of God and the full manifestation of the essential holiness of life, then the age of motivation by virtue of enlightenment will have arrived. This is like a structure built on the foundation of motivation by virtue of the law, which of necessity must precede that of motivation by virtue of enlightenment for all humanity. Then human beings will recognize their companions in the creation, all the animals, and they will understand how it is fitting from the standpoint of the purest ethical standard not to resort to moral concessions, to compromise the divine attribute of justice with that of mercy by permitting mankind's exploitation of animals, for they will no longer need extenuating concessions, as in those matters of which the Talmud states, as in Kiddushin, Daf 31 Amud Beis, the Torah speaks only of the evil inclination. Rather, they will walk the path of absolute good. As the prophet declares, I will make a covenant for them with the animals of the field, the birds of the air, and the creeping things of the ground. I will also banish the bow and the sword, and war from the land, and I will cause them to rest in safety. I will betroth you to me forever, and I will betroth you to me with righteousness, with justice, with kindness, and with compassion. And I will betroth you to me with faith, and you will know God. This is from Hosea chapter 2 verse 20. Moving on to chapter 14. This deals with shechita and the concept of humane slaughter. The act of slaughter, shechita, must be sanctified in a unique manner, as I have commanded you, with a minimum of pain to the animal. Thus, the person will take to the heart the fact that this is a sentient being. He is not involved with a random object that moves around like an automaton, but with living, feeling creature. He must become attuned to its senses, even to its emotions, to the feeling it has for the life of its family members, and to its compassion for its own offspring. Thus, it is biblically forbidden to kill the mother bird with her children on the same day, or to slaughter a calf before it is 8 days old, and it is a positive precept to send away the mother bird before taking her young. Moving on to chapter 17. This talks about covering the blood. In Vayikra, chapter 17, verse 13, I quote, "If any one of the children of Israel or a convert who joins them traps an animal or bird that may be eaten and spills its blood, he must cover the blood with earth." This obligation to cover the blood teaches us to see the shedding of a non-domestic animal's blood as an act akin to murder. Thus, we should be ashamed to shed the blood of a domestic animal as well. It was not deemed necessary to cover the blood of a domestic animal because it is slaughtered in an area where people are commonly found. Thus, it is preferable to leave the blood of the animal in plain sight, that it may remind others that slaughtering an animal is like murder. This is not the case with a non-domestic animal and birds that are trapped and slaughtered far from human habitation, whose blood is not seen. Here, by contrast, the obligation of covering the blood teaches that this is a shameful act. And moving on to chapter 20, about the concept of not cooking meat and milk together. As it says in Shemot, chapter 23, verse 19, and I quote, "The first of the new produce of your land you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk." The mother animal does not live so that a person, simply by his right of ownership, may exploit her for his own purposes. Rather, her milk is intended for her own young, whom she loves. The kid, too, is entitled by its natural disposition to the pleasure of its mother's loving breast. However, the cruelty of the human heart, produced by our coarse materialism and moral weakness, distorts and perverts these principles. Thus, the tender kid, according to the assessment of man's inferior ethical sensitivity, has no right to nestle against its loving mother, nor to enjoy the light of life, but deserves only to be slaughtered in order to provide food for the bellies of gluttonous human beings, whose debased souls insist, "I will eat meat." This is from Devarim, chapter 12, verse 20. According to this, what should be the purpose of the milk, if not to cook in it the slaughtered kid? Is this not a natural combination of these two essential foods, the milk and the tender kid that derives nurture from it? However, humanity, let your ears hear something behind you, the voice of God that loudly cries, "You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk." No, the purpose of the kid is not merely to be food for your sharp teeth, sharpened and polished by your lowliness and gluttony in eating meat, and certainly the milk is not intended to be a condiment for the satisfaction of your base desire. Moving on to chapter 26, the law of Trefa. "People of holiness, you shall be unto me. You shall not eat the flesh of an animal that was torn in the field." This is Shemot chapter 22, verse 30. Distinctive amongst the traits of Yisrael is the compassion that waits to blossom into manifestation from amidst the feelings of the pure-hearted and spread from humanity to all living creatures. This compassion is nascent within the prohibition of eating nevela, an animal that has died as a result of sickness, or a trefa, an animal that has died as a result of bodily injury. Just as we naturally feel greater pity for a sick or injured human being than we feel for the healthy, the unfortunate injured animal deserves our additional sympathy. Having internalized the ethical implication of the Torah's prohibition of eating the flesh of a torn animal, our hearts can fully experience the spirit of enlightenment that relates to the precept of visiting the sick, prompting us to relieve their distress. The commonality that exists between our feelings of compassion for both animals and human beings also expresses itself in connection with the need to guard our health, both spiritually and physically, and in not putting ourselves on the same plane as the predatory beasts. Rather, our Torah imposes upon us the further obligation to bring about their good, to benefit and to enlighten them. How could we consume the trefa lying in the field, which would appear like dividing the spoil with the wild beasts, and constitute a tacit approval of their predatory habits? It is true that amongst the various categories of trefa discussed by the Talmudic sages, we must distinguish between a mortally injured animal in the field and a terminally ill human being. However, the suffering of both creatures calls for our compassion, which initially should be awakened on behalf of the wretched and the outcast. The law of the animal that died as a result of sickness prepares the heart to feel even greater repugnance towards exploiting the misfortune of other creatures in the event of their deaths. This sensitivity signals a sense of comradeship, sharing another's pain, and our having entered the borders of their inner world. With this, the motivation by virtue of enlightenment will supersede the motivation by virtue of law, causing us to distance ourselves from committing any evil upon those, our comrades in the universe, since we all come forth from the hand of one Creator, the Master of all things. And chapter 31 discusses animals during the Messianic age. At the end of days, an inner thirst will prompt each person to search for someone upon whom to confer benevolence, upon whom to pour forth his overflowing spirit of kindness, but none will be found. For all humanity already will have attained happiness, living lives of delight, gratification, and prosperity in every sense, materially, ethically, and intellectually. Then, with all its store of wisdom, its collective insight and experience, humanity will turn towards its brothers on lower levels of creation, the mute and the downtrodden, including the animal kingdom, and they will seek means to share wisdom with them, to instruct and enlighten them according to their abilities, thus to elevate them from level to level. There is no question that humanity will take an active part in this, when the time comes to accomplish this mission. Beyond all doubt, humanity will share the enlightenment of the Torah with the animal kingdom, affecting their physical development and, all the more so, their ethical and spiritual development. This state of enlightenment will reach such a lofty level that we cannot imagine it at present, due to our lowliness and lack of wisdom. All beings shall receive a new exalted form, a new world. This is implied by the words of our sages in Sanhedrin, Daf 65 on the base. If they so desired, the Tzaddikim could create a world. And finally, chapter 32, the spiritual perfection of animals. As a consequence of their spiritual elevation in general, the lofty level attained by animals in the course of their development will also affect their senses and feelings, to attune and refine them. Indeed, a higher nature comes with this. As it says in Yeshayahu 30 verse 24, "And the oxen and the young donkeys who work the soil shall eat enriched food that was winnowed with the shovel and with the fan. For according to the loftiness of their souls, the faculty of taste will be developed to a higher degree of sensitivity, as befits their spiritual stature." With a still small voice, does the wisdom of Israel, the Kabbalah, speak. The level of animals in the future will partake of the level of humanity as it is today, due to the ascent of the worlds. This is the radiant vision that prophets disclose to us of the civilized state that will be attained by the predatory animals of today. And I quote from Yeshaya, chapter 11, verses 6 to 9. And a wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and a leopard shall lie with a kid, and the calf and a lion cub and a fatling together, and a small child shall lead them. And a heifer and a bear shall graze together. Their young shall lie down together, and a lion, like the ox, shall eat straw. And an infant shall play over a viper's hole, and over the den of an adder shall a weaned child stretch forth his hands. They shall neither harm nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the knowledge of God shall fill the earth as the water covers the sea.
What a fantastic selection there you've given us there. It'd be amazing to read the full version of that, but we know it's a very rare text, and thank you very much for sharing that with us, Michael. And that about wraps it up for this final episode. So on behalf of everyone on Torah Anytime, we'd like to thank you, Michael Kalati, for sharing us your words of wisdom, and it's definitely an eye-opener. And I really hope that you can come away with all the sources and all the information and the facts and the figures and everything that we've given you, and at least go home and think about what Michael has taken great pains to present, and make an informed decision. And if you can't become a vegetarian overnight, okay, but at least you can minimize it to half your meat intake. If everybody did that, the world would change almost overnight. So it's up to us to take on board. There are not many people who've done what Michael has done and have brought a presentation like this to the to Torah Anytime. So thank you very much, Michael, and hopefully we'll hear some more from you very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best. Bye now.